Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Office Hours with the Professor. As always, I'm your host, William the Professor Collis, and I picked an interesting news story for us this week because it's not actually the news story I want to cover. It's the article that generated this news story itself. So you might be asking, what is this? Well, I chose the Daily Mail's coverage of Fnatic's esports team. And this is an article that's essentially the Daily Mail going behind the scenes with Fnatic pros to see how they prepare for an upcoming CSGO tournament. And the content of this article is something that I'm guessing listeners of this podcast are already pretty familiar with, right? You know, that these players have a really high level of skill in the game that they're playing, that they can earn very high salaries, that they're on multi-year contracts, that there are coaches and staff to support them, that the pros have to go to the gym and maybe follow certain dietary restrictions to make sure they're in the best competitive shape, et cetera, right? Fundamentally, the content of this article is stuff that I think is not earth-shattering to anyone who's followed esports for the last 5 or 6 years. Why I wanted to cover this article was specifically because of the Daily Mail writing about esports. If you're not familiar, the Daily Mail is a relatively popular, widely circulated paper in the United Kingdom, but crucially, the average age of a Daily Mail reader is 58 years old. So I think this article is a really interesting insight into how esports is sort of being described and presented outside of what I would call kind of the core under 40 demographic, which are basically people who grew up with video games and have some sort of understanding of what games are. And what I was really surprised and why I thought this article was worth, talking about for a second is I really noticed a distinct lack of judgment in this Daily Mail article. A lot of times the historical coverage of esports has been pejorative or I can't believe this is real. But actually this Daily Mail piece, and I'm simplifying here, there was a lot in it, there's a lot to respond to, but broadly, I thought it was very flattering. You see discussions of the challenges of getting good, how legitimate the skills of the players are, their commitment to long practices and a professional lifestyle, high earnings. There's a $12 billion figure thrown out for the size of the esports industry, which I'm not sure if I fully agree with, but it's nice to have that big number associated with, gaming. We see discussions of these pro gamers having real careers, comparisons to traditional sports, mentions of maybe including esports in the Olympics. All of this adds up to esports being presented to a 58-year-old average demographic, not simply as a novelty, but as something that's really interesting and potentially valuable and sort of might be worth doing and certainly is a big industry that people should know about. In summary, there was this distinct lack of judgment. And in my mind, this article is worth highlighting because it's indicative of a watershed shift in how esports are being viewed. That the industry has become so ubiquitous, so popular, that even in folks and, sort of readers and, people who are interested outside of the very core demographic, or even the broader core demographic, esports is now being presented as something that is important and valuable and real business. And so that's why I wanted to cover this article today. It's fun. You should check it out and see sort of how esports coverage is treated in the Daily Mail if you're curious to take your own take. But broadly, I give this story a pass. I really didn't want to grade it, but people get mad if, I don't put a grade on things. But I thought this was a fun snapshot in just how far esports has come. And I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of Office Hours.